Thanks so much. Thanks for signing on for a double dose of lectures. I'll try to get us through pretty quick. I want to thank Joel and James for welcoming me into the Eavesdropping project. I'm a relatively new arrival to Melbourne, and it's been super exciting to see the work that's being done, see some of the creative artists, the amazing stuff that they're doing, and to enter into conversation with the folks who are involved with liquid architecture and the Eavesdropping project. So thanks so much. I appreciate that. Thanks to Jake for his super generous opening comments. It's always an inspiration to talk to Jake and tough to follow him. But I'm going to pick up in a sense on one of the themes that came out of his talk, which has to do with the observation that he made that these automated devices don't see and they don't hear, and instead they create databases or collections of data. And I'm really interested in the difference between what those two processes might be, right? What does it mean to say they're not hearing or they're not seeing? And I think that's a core question at the heart of what automation means these days. And so I'm going to try to come at it from a bunch of different directions and think through some of the consequences. And the term that I'm using to talk about what it means to differentiate between what automated hearing is and what we might mean by hearing is operationalism. And so I'm going to try to think through, and my inspiration here, as you'll see as we go, is the work of Haron Faroki on the operational image, and then how that gets taken up by the artist Trevor Paglen in some recent work that he's done. And then thinking what happens when you transpose that argument into the register of hearing and listening. As a first pass, and I'll come at it in some different ways, thinking about that distinction. One, and I don't have this in the slides, but I was just trying to think of different ways to come at it. I remember being back at another job in another town, involved in a emerging formation of so-called digital humanities, which you may have encountered in various guises along the way, or you may have heard of it. And I was looking at some of the research. I was trying to figure out, what this meant, this formation. And so I started looking at some of the research in the area. And I came across a research project that seemed fascinating, and the formulation was both interesting and kind of scary. It was a project that had digitized the entire corpus of Irish, I think it was the Irish novel. And then it claimed, as Jake had suggested, that there's patterns and there information that can be discerned through the process of running all of this through a database by automated forms of pattern detection that are inaccessible to human readers, in part because it's very hard to internalize the entire corpus of the Irish novel at that level of detail. The interesting thing that the opening gambit, which intrigued me, was a kind of enthusiastic paean to the power of the automated system that was processing this. And they were looking at things that had a transformation in the uses of words or the proximity of words to each other and how those changed over time. And one of the ways that they qualified that information and framed it as super interesting was, and we were able to discern these changes and these developments without having to read any of the books. What a fantasy! I mean, what a promise, I guess, for automated learning and automated students and automated professors. That idea was fascinating, and of course, what they said is very true. They were able to discern patterns at a granular level that nobody's going to perceive in a database that large, even if you tried to read through all of those novels. But what did you lose by not reading the novels? Right? That's one of the questions I'm thinking over and trying to get at. But to set it up, and again, Jake referenced this, but I thought I'd start to think about what it means to automate listening, and then get to what one might mean by thinking about how operational listening takes place. The automation of listening is something that is perceived by the industry, the digital tech information data industries, as one of the cutting edge data collection frontiers, and as also one of the emerging defining aspects of the interface. Right? The idea that we are moving now increasingly to a voice-based or voice command based interface where we will be able to tell our devices what to do instead of having to seek them out, find them, type in stuff. We can get this command interface. And I've been thinking about that in terms of a kind of logical progression towards the increasing virtualization of the material environment. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. I don't mean virtualization in the sense of dematerialization, but virtualization in the sense of, and although these two things kind of approach each other, the infinite malleability of the physical world, right? So this idea, or maybe the other way to put it is the infinite responsiveness of it, that structures, devices, spaces that faced us with the inflexible obdurateness of matter will become responsive to us and bend to our will and follow our desires and whims. And I'll come at that in a couple of different ways. But one of the ways to think about this is smart spaces that deform or adjust according to the presence of those individuals in those spaces, right? If I go into the room, it's going to play the music that I want. It's going to know, attributes of me that it can respond to, and in a sense, it already starts to form itself around me based on the information that it's able to collect from me. And in order to do that, you have to collect more and more information about the subject whose the space is deforming around, and that's, I think, one of the additional imperatives, besides the promise of a convenience, to the multiplying sensory interfaces that folks who are developing the technology continue to try to unpack, if that makes sense, right? It's going to be not only what you say, but also what it can read off of your face and biometrics, perhaps what it can get off of what it knows about your background. More and more information is needed in order to make these spaces conform, respond, start to fit us. And I'm thinking of, this. I was fascinated with Jake to learn that this technology is the fastest technology penetration of any device. I didn't know that. I'm surprised by that. But I shouldn't be, because every time I go on Amazon, they're trying to sell me 10 of them for $5 or whatever their latest gambit is. But the imperative is there to build out this this form of an interface, right? To put that in place, and that imperative is there. On the one hand, I suppose, is the offer of convenience. On the other hand, of course, as a super high resolution data collection infrastructure, right? And we know this by looking at some of the patents that I'll bring up a little bit later about the types of things that the folks who are developing the technology think that they can do with this data and information. But I'm going to try to push the goal of what's taking place through the logics of automation to get to operationalism. And to do that, I want to note one of the defining aspects, I think, of this data collection economy, which is something that I'm describing as cascading logic of automation, right? In order to collect the huge amounts of information that are seen to be useful or convenient in order to make the environment deform to those who move through it, you need to collect so much information that the process itself, the interface, has to become automated, right? And I think that's true. If you think about our own logics of interaction with devices, the amount of work that it takes to enter in information about ourselves is too much with respect to the amount of information that those who are collecting it would like to collect. So you need passive interfaces. You need to be able to collect information automatically. And the voice, the dimension of voice is one, while not entirely passive in the sense you need to speak in order for that information to be collected, it allows for passive forms of data collection, right? You know, the patent that Amazon has filed envisions the possibility of listening to ambient conversation in order to determine possible marketable terms from what's being said, right? So you're having a conversation with somebody else, you're not even talking to the machine, and it can collect information about yourself. The other thing, of course, is that voice does open up new dimensions for passive information collection in the sense that you're not deliberately communicating what might be collected, right? Voice stress, mood, health, all of the things that can be read off of the voice that might not necessarily be able to be collected through another form of interface, right? So the folks who developed Siri, the technology behind Siri, have a while back were talking about ways in which they could detect stress in the human voice and use that. I'll show you a couple of examples of that in a second. But I wanted to think about this. Once you automate data collection, once you're collecting these huge amounts of information, you have to process that data. The processing has to be automated. You've collected such a huge database, it's just not possible to make sense of it at the human level. Once that happens, once you're the push to automated response seems like the next logical step, right? So this is what I mean by a cascade. You know, why not automate the response? And that pushes in a direction that gets quite extreme. And we can think of this in a number of different registers. But as James mentioned, I'm writing a book about drones, so I've thought about it in terms of security and lethal autonomous weapons. But I've also thought about it in the realm of commerce. This idea that you could automate response to the point that it, in a sense, becomes autonomous from the desiring subject. That's a fascinating fantasy, right? This term, umbilicular, I thought it as a very clunky neologism. I thought that I'd coined that, but it turns out James Joyce uses this term in Ulysses. I Googled it to see if anybody had used it before. And then I felt better because he made it sound kind of cool. But this notion that through the interactive interface, the desire can be anticipated before it manifests is, it's a standard trope of marketing, but it's a fascinating way of thinking about what it means to automate response at the level of preempting an action or desire before it emerges. This is Amazon's, patented plan that will ship you products before you know you want them. Right? You just open the door or the box, the Amazon box. You're like, wow, I didn't know. And there's that, very short moment where desire emerges and is extinguished simultaneously. Right? Thinking about the role that voice plays, and again, I'm doing this because I want to think about the register of automation. The process of automation through the register of listening. These are some of the futuristic promises that emerge around the voice command interface. The devices that actually power your smart home will be voice activated, even without the assistant. Turn on the TV, lower the heat, start vacuuming the floor. You can see this, right? Like, it's the same thing as happening with voice as was happening with other forms of interactivity, right? There's a clear step here. Like, cool move, right? I can just sit in my armchair and go like vacuum, heat up, wash the dishes, right? And then the next step is kind of like, well, damn, you're having to talk so much to all your devices. Wouldn't it be better if they just knew, right? So the next automated step. Similar thing, right? Connect it, start a video on your phone, tell it to mirror on your TV, tell your YouTube to look for videos, all of this stuff, right? Get you to talk more and more, and then eventually reach the point where you've talked so much that it knows, right? So you don't even have to talk anymore. I love thinking about this through the register of the umbilicular logic, right? Your car's infotainment system is quickly becoming voice-enabled. one day soon you'll hop into a self-driving car and simply state your destination, and it'll take you there. And the day after, you'll hop into your car, and you won't know where you want to go, but it will know. And it will take you there. This is the biometrics that the folks who developed Siri were working into their system. If your car thinks you sound stressed, it may SMS your office to say you're late. That's so nice as a solution. Right? Mark's stressed. I don't know how they think your office is going to respond, but maybe they'll say, play some calming music. Play Enya. Or how about a voice-controlled Ford system that starts playing you say Enya to calm the nerves or injects a tranquilizer or whatever it is. That's thinking about automation, and the process of automation is leading, as you can tell from this setup, to a kind of it's an interesting dynamic, right? It's kind of like the perfection of service to the subject that will eventually extinguish the subject, right? We're going to serve you so perfectly, all of your needs. This is why I'm using the term umbilicular, right? That if we get gotten staged correctly, you'll just disappear as a subject, right? Because whatever it is, the desire, whatever it is that mobilizes the lack, the subject, all of those will be filled in before they can emerge. So thinking about that from the flip side, in a sense, I'm interested in what are the logics that go along with this preempted subject? And to do that, I'm using this notion of the operational. And the inspiration here is Harlan Faruqi's that should I /machine. There's a typo in there. His series. I'll just show you a little bit of it. But he I don't know if anybody's seen these, but he went around to industrial spaces and military spaces and collected found footage of images that he described as operative images. I call such pictures made neither to entertain nor to inform operative images. These are images that do not represent an object, but rather are part of an operation. His images, not incidentally, some of them are military. He was inspired, I think part of the inspiration, or part of what he writes about when he talks about these images, was the first Gulf War, the U.S., the view from the smart camera, from the smart bomb's finder camera, where you just kind of watch the smart bomb approach its target and then disappear. But he went through a bunch of different laser sensor examines a bridge. I don't know why, this fascinates me. The bridge is read in the computer. And he does these kind of editorial comments along the way. He wants to think, how is it that the machine sees? But it's a kind of fake setup, right? Because he's showing us how the machine shows us that it sees. It's a contrived interface for us. I'm fascinated by the military overtones of all this because it looks like violence to me. Right? So the processes that I'm talking about seem to me to be deeply tied into logics of violence and promotional film, bombing. These images have no operational function. These are propaganda. This is for humans. And then he switches back to, what is it that the bomb sees? And he goes to some technical images here. Anyway, I won't. It's this kind of thing fascinates you. It's worth checking out. But what I'm interested in is that what does it mean to think of an image that doesn't represent a non-representational image, right? That's what the automation move is asking us to think. What is the non-representational image, right? Well, it's the operational image. Trevor Paglen tries to reconstruct this. He goes back and he tries to update Faruqi's operational images, and he comes to this finding that actually these images that were made for humans to see how machines see aren't being made so much anymore. We're quickly approaching a moment where most of the images in the world are descendants of the operational images. I guess it would be operative. He switches a little bit. An I machine, namely images made by machines for other machines. And then he says, meat eyes, they're not making them anymore. Meat eyes are far too inefficient to see what's going on anyway. I want to pull out that phrase, images made by machines for other machines. Now, to use the word image raises some interesting questions. So why image? It could be something else, pattern, or I'm not sure what word that we would use. But that notion that we're talking, when we get to the register of the operational, we're thinking about images that are made by machines for other machines. Humans are out of the loop, in a sense. They're not entirely out of the loop. I was trying to think about this. I'm using this, famous, like, if, what is it, like, if you're not buying the product, you are the product, or to think about, what it means. If you don't encounter the interface, you are the medium, right? Taken to its limit, the emerging logic of the smart city, the smart space, is to disappear the interface, right? It's to embed it entirely into the space that you move through, right? So it's not that you're going to move through a space that has lots of interfaces that you command as you go through them, but that actually it will be filled with sensors that passively collect and respond, right? And so in a sense, the interface, the goal of the kind of perfection of sensor-based control is the disappearance of the interface. And what does it mean to say that you are the medium? You become the intermediate state between the image that the machine makes and the image the machine sends to the other machine to read, right? That makes sense. I think to try to make sense of that, these like mood apps were in vogue a few years ago. I remember Microsoft was developing one. They had some Microsoft researchers. I can't remember what it was called, like Moodifier, or I can't remember. But it was a device that measured your mood. But it didn't measure your mood. They didn't really know what your mood was. Like they correlated some of the way that you used your device with a self-report. So you said, I'm feeling happy, and they'd say, well, this pattern of smartphone usage correlates with this, Mark saying he's happy. But they didn't really care about whether you were happy or sad. What they cared about was whatever that mood state, however that correlated with subsequent actions. Am I going to click on something? Am I going to listen to this music? Am I going to purchase this product? Right? So I, as the mood, became basically the intermediate state between a set of measured set of operations on a smartphone and a measured activity in an interface. Right? So I became what linked those two machinic images. Anyway, I don't know. I'm just trying that formulation out. I haven't done that before. I thought I'd see what you think of it. To get again to the space of representation, I'll try to come at it from a couple of different ways. This is from an article that Trevor Paglen wrote about operational seeing, and what he did was, he trained. He's got his own image classifier. I couldn't find a better image, but I love this. I love this image where he takes the classic comment on representation, right? The Magritte, we don't have the pipe one, right? But the Apple one, ceci n'est pas une pomme, right? And then he gets the image classifier to train on the image. And of course, what it says is, Apple, right? Which gets, I think, to this point of the space of representation, right? What's the difference between an operative image, which, again, I think the emerging logic of operationalism is the notion of a referent kind of disappears, right? It's operational. It does something. Whatever it might correspond to is not quite the point, if that makes sense. And this stages it in a kind of nice way, right? Here's a representation, allows us to think about the space between the signifier and the signified, language and reality. It allows us to imagine those spaces by interrupting this kind of, saying, actually, that's not an apple. In fact, that masks the absence of an apple, or whatever it is that a signifier does. But the image classifier comes along and collapses that space. So, operational listening. What is it that, I mean, another way to come at this is to think about what is it that gets heard by the machine that's listening. And obviously, many of these technologies are being developed from a commercial perspective, and what gets heard has to do with thinking about you as the medium between a particular imperative, which is selling stuff, and a particular action, which is you buying it. You might, I don't know if there are other ways, like if you're in your house and you happen to be reciting a poem or singing a song, whatever those things mean to you is not going to be the type of thing that the operational machine captures. It's gonna hear you love skiing. I don't know what it's going to make of that term love. It's gonna correlate it with some sentiment analysis stuff, and it's going to figure out, oh, okay, maybe there's an ad that we can serve. The algorithm would then process the statements into keywords that could be used to target advertising. The interesting thing about this, just a small detail, and I don't know quite what to make of it, but because they've made a big deal out of the fact that they're not recording everything that you say all the time, the patent actually says that it converts it to text before it sends it to Amazon. Now, they're not doing this, as far as I know now. This is the patent. But they were already thinking, how can we get around people being creeped out by things being recorded? Well, we'll tell them, we're not, like all that stuff you're saying, we're not uploading these recordings to the cloud. But what they don't tell you is we're transcribing it, I guess, within the device, and then sending transcriptions. That's how the patent works anyway. The types of decisions that can be made, and I guess what I wanted to do with these examples is think about the play of power. Who is it that's putting these technologies to use, and what types of uses are they making of them? Commerce is obviously a big one. This Java line, oh yeah, Frank mentioned this one. That's because that was in my, I've been looking at this. This is one of the examples that came up. This is an application that promises to measure voice attributes of employees, figure out who will be an what impact the voice will have on listeners, whether that will be good for sales or so on, whoever you're hiring somebody for. Sorry, I'm going to skip that one. I'm guiding my kind of thinking about this space of representation are some of the claims that Zizek makes about psychosis. Right? And one of the observations that he makes, this is in the closing essay on virtual reality in The Indivisible Remainder. He says, virtual reality gives rise to the dream of a language which no longer acts upon the subject merely through the intermediate sphere of meaning, but has direct effects in the real. Right? So the goal is no longer, in a sense, to represent the world to you, but to be the world. Right? Taken to its endpoint, this would be, and in my thinking, which might be slightly polemic, the endpoint of a kind of perfectly customized smart space and virtual reality is one of convergence, right? Both of them operate in this register of a kind of operational register. They become responsive in ways that don't have to do with symbolic representation, but have to do with operational logics. They do things for you. So drawing on Lacan, Zizek makes this claim. Psychosis is characterized precisely by the paradoxical coincidence of overproximity and externality. Right? So overproximity and externality. I think what he means by this is overproximity is the perceived absence of mediation, right, of the virtual reality or of the sensory interface, right? Like that you feel in a sense that what it is that if the image was a mediation at one point, it loses whatever it's mediating and it just becomes the real, right? So a certain overproximity. At the same time, an externality. That this is, I know this is just virtual reality. Not only that, this is something, and he writes about this in elsewhere. The virtual reality is this kind of fantasy of total freedom, played through the register of complete control, right? In other words, I can do anything. I can fly. I can walk through walls. Whatever it is that I want to do in virtuality, only insofar as I'm completely dependent on a highly sophisticated technological infrastructure that's probably not one that I have control over at all. Right? So anyway, a psychotic, and going to try to, this is a leap I haven't done before, so I'm going to try it here before you, and I might just fall on my face. But this notion of a psychotic treating words as things, in his universe words, so on the one hand, a kind of external relationship to the symbolic order, right? It's this virtual reality. I don't feel caught up in it in a sense. I have a certain kind of, I understand that it's a set of manipulations. But on the other hand, a psychotic treats words as things. In his universe, words fall into things, and or things themselves start to speak. Right? This is, I can't read this without thinking of that notorious, famous, now forgotten Chris Anderson piece about big data. He doesn't call it big data there. I can't remember what he calls it in that piece. Where he says, out with psychology, philosophy, sociology, with enough data, the numbers speak for themselves. Right? This idea that actually we don't need to understand or figure things out because the data will speak for itself. It'll tell us that. But it's, isn't it? I don't know. It's also kind of a nice foreshadowing of the completely fetishized world of the Internet of Things. Right? Like, wow, these things are really going to be speaking. In fact, and the advertisers and marketers use this language. Yeah, your toaster will talk to your refrigerator and get you bread. Or, like somehow this world of things themselves starting to speak as the fantasy of the Internet of, and you can show up at that point because they'll be doing all the communicating, right? They'll do all the stuff for you. And this is the leap part, right? If in normal symbolic communication we're dealing with the distance between things and words, which opens the space for the domain of sense, right? This gestures back to the very beginning, right? Like the space, what do you get out of reading the books, right? That's different from running them through the machine. Well, you get this indeterminate space of meaning, a space of interpretation, a space of judgment, a space of politics, right? All the spaces that go along with the vagaries of interpretation that are what? They're the target to be obliterated by operationalism, right? This is my dystopic take on this. Right? In the case of virtual reality, on the contrary, the very overproximity of the sign and the designated content disengages us, closes up the space for symbolic engagement, right? And so, I'll make a couple of moves here. Right? I've been slightly obsessed by it, although I can't spend too much time on it because I can't make sense of it, by the rise of this QAnon conspiracy in the Trump era. And I was trying to think, what makes it possible for people to, in a sense, kind of abdicate meaning entirely? Right? If you've tried to read, the most interesting, frustrating, like dumb experience is to go, which I've tried, is to go read QAnon and like make sense of the stories. Right? It's maybe something that Hollywood movies have been preparing us for a long time, right? Like it makes no sense, right? It's just things that operate on us, that trigger like fear, anxiety, heroism, whatever it is that you feel if you're a QAnon person. But it seems to have that psychotic moment to it of this is a way of doing things. This is a way of upsetting people. I don't know, anger all the normies. But it has nothing to do with engagement on the level of interpretation or meaning, as far as I can tell. Now, that I might not be doing justice to those folks, but I'm trying to extract the psychotic impulse and thinking about the purely external relationship to the symbolic. I just think of this woman who was approached after the Mueller indictment of several, a dozen Russians for creating fake internet sites or fake American internet sites in order to try to sow dissent and mobilize Trump supporters and so on. And they went to one of the people who was circulating this content that was being generated by the Russian internet agency, and they told her, they asked her, they went with this kind of very meaning interpretation. I'm going to tell you, like I'm going to try to talk about what's happening in the world. Explain to her the content that you were sharing on your Facebook site was actually generated by Russians, and the events that you were promoting were ones that were staged by these, kind of internet trolls. But her response was fascinating. Like, your words have no purchase on me. They mean nothing. She just said, I don't believe you. It's all made up. I don't have anything to do with Russians. It's that weird moment of the symbolic just not having any purchase at all. Right? This is what makes me very anxious, which is why I write about these things. But the kind of like this external relation to the symbolic, such that it no longer, it may continue apace in its own ways, but it no longer has any purchase on the subjects. And the flip side of that, as Zizek suggests, is this hyperproximity, the fantasy of somebody like Zuckerberg, right, who's thinking about how VR, in the end, is going to do, this is another form of the obliteration of the subject, right? We're going to reach the point where you don't communicate in words anymore, you don't even communicate in images, but we're going to do like Vulcan mind meld with you via Facebook, right? And then, so like we'll control the infrastructure that becomes the process whereby the pure thought unsullied by the symbolic can be directly injected into whoever you're communicating with. So anyway, those are some provocations about the operationalism, the psychotic character of operational listening. Thank you.